Everyone. You're all very welcome. Shane Coleman here from News Talk. I can see just by the numbers going up that there's still a number of you still logging on. So we'll just give it a moment or two just to, great to see such a big turnout, by the way. We're already well over 100. So great to see so many people here, and great to see this level of interest in what is a fascinating area. Logging on today, we have senior management, access and disability staff, administrative and teaching staff, and students from across the entire higher education sector. We're also really pleased to welcome representatives from the Department of Education, the HEA and the USI, as well as guidance counsellors, disability organisations, and many others. Now, I think we're all pretty much logged on or close to it. On behalf of the IUA, I'd like to formally welcome you to this third and final IUA Future of Ireland webinar for this year. In today's webinar, we're going to look at the infrastructure and culture change needed to make the inclusive university a reality across the university sector in Ireland. Great lineup of guests for you today on our panels, students, policy experts, practitioners, academics. We hope it's going to be a really fruitful discussion, and we want you guys to get involved in the discussion as well. Please put your questions and panelists in either in the Q&A section. Probably the Q&A section is the best place to do it. We'll try and get to those as many of those as we can in the time allowed. So look, I think our panelists have now all turned off their video and muted themselves. They're going to rejoin us as needs be. We're going to begin with a short speech from Anne Rabbitte TD, who of course is the Minister of State for Persons with Disabilities. The Minister very kindly gave us her contribution using video, and we're just going to play that for you now.
Thank you so much for asking me to speak to you today. I'm genuinely delighted to be with you all, and I know that many of us has been watching the RT documentary, My Uni Life. I found it so engaging and impressive that I was so honoured to have the opportunity to be part of the IUA seminar. Weren't the student stories and the testimonies so moving and inspiring? It's so important to have this seminar, to have focus today on students and their work, to hear the perspective of higher education students who will no doubt be inspired by what they see and hear and feel confident to explore the range of options available after secondary school. Addressing the institutional and the systematic change and the need for access, inclusion and diversity to become everyone's business is vital. I'm so glad this seminar will address those issues today. This discussion needs to be happening now, today, in educational, cultural institutions across our country. That's how we can make the inclusive university a reality across the sector. We've had success with the initiatives like DARE, HERE and others, but we need to build on those and maintain the momentum to encourage mainstreamed access, particularly because many students still face multiple barriers to a higher education and belong to more than one specific target group. I am really very interested in hearing how we are doing in moving access, inclusion and diversity from the margins in higher education to become everyone's business. Institutions are now required to prepare their own students' access strategy. I think this gives them the real opportunity to take the whole of institution approach to student success, especially more vulnerable groups. I just want to mention the National Plan for Equity of Access to Higher Education 2015 to 2021. It's an ambitious, grounded in principles of equality and social inclusion. They are national policy priorities for me and this government. Access to higher education should be available to everyone, regardless of socio-economic disadvantage, geographical location, disability or other circumstances. There are 6 target groups in NAP. 1. Entrants from socio-economic groups that have low participation in higher education. 2. The first-time mature students. 3. Students with disabilities. 4. Part-time and flexible learners. 5. Further education award holders. And finally, Irish travellers. There was progress review in 2018 and it was positive to see that the disabilities target group had made most progress and actually exceeded the 8% by the stage of progress review in 2018. Bear with me while I hit with you some more statistics. I don't want to bore anyone, but I do think that's important to note. In this review, they saw overall participation had increased to 10%. There was a 71% increase in participation by students with physical and mobility disabilities. The participation rates by deaf or hard of hearing students had increased by 46%. Blind students or those who are vision impaired increased by 24%. So, the overall participation of students with disabilities has therefore been increased by 12% by the end of 2021. Wouldn't it be great to build on these successes every year? A key ambition of the NAP is to help increase access to higher education in communities that tend towards lower participation levels. Higher education institutions are collaborating closely with second-level schools and community groups to development programs and initiatives for students in second-level education. There are several funding opportunities to bolster these efforts. The Funds for Students with Disability allocates funding to higher education institutions for the provision of services and support to full and part-time students with disabilities. It tries to ensure that students can participate fully in their academic progress so as they're not disadvantaged by the reason of a disability. There is also a fund called the PATH Programme for access to higher education. The PATH Fund supports the NAP and supports people with access, initially teacher education, by providing bursaries of $5,000 to disadvantaged students. As Minister of State for Persons with Disability, I'm pleased to say that on average, a quarter of the 200 of the bursary recipients every year are students with disabilities. We must work even harder than ever in the context of the pandemic to ensure we continue to help students to transition to succeed in higher education. Various initiatives under the strands of the PATH funding are aimed at increasing participation. These will help us to continue to reach our targets, but also crucially will help people to understand the barriers that exist for some students in accessing higher education. This is why I thought the RTE show was so powerful. What people see is important, and if people don't meet disability or diversity in their own lives, it is easy for them not to make considerations for other people. Presenting it to them in their living rooms through the national broadcaster is bound to have a very positive impact. Equity of access to higher education is a national priority for the government. In 2021, the government ring-fenced additional funding to be able to increase the number of Path 2 bursaries in 2021. Mainstreaming the delivery of equity of access in higher education is challenging to the system, and in the next phase of the implementation of the current National Access Plan to 2021, which is to be led by Minister Harris. It is great to have this opportunity today for the sector to consider how to achieve this important goal. There is definitely progress being made. You can see it. The mainstreaming goal of the National Access Plan has a way to go, but it's going at least. However, the consultation process conducted as part of the progress review of the National Access Plan highlighted that there is uncertainty in higher education institutions as to the meaning of mainstreaming and its operation in practice. Today is the key opportunity to focus on mainstreaming ambition and to deepen the understanding of this strategic priority within the higher education sector. If you don't understand it, how can you be expected to achieve it? Having more access champions within facilities has been successful in so many settings, and more of that would be greatly welcomed. While challenges always remain, the positive progress is testament to the commitment of everyone involved and strongly suggests to me that these challenges can be addressed and overcome. I wish you every success with your event today. And I say again, many thanks for having me.
Okay, thank you very much, Minister Rabbit. Those really interesting, encouraging words and really interesting stats. And I think it's fair to say very positive stats. I think the Minister's right, great progress has been made and we need to now build on that progress. And she's absolutely right about that RTE show, incredibly powerful. And congratulations to everybody who is involved in the making of that show. Okay, thank you indeed, Minister. I'd now like to welcome Professor John O'Halloran, the Interim President of UCC and Chair of the Access Steering Committee for HEIs, just to give some opening comments. Professor O'Halloran.
Thank you very much, Shane, and colleagues. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for giving me the privilege and the opportunity to start off this really important event here today. And I really welcome the words of our Minister, and it's great to have a Minister speaking so positively and so enthusiastically about supporting all of us in higher education, but particularly to make us an inclusive institution. Why are we doing this? Because it's International Access to Education Day. We're trying to mark it. If you're from the United States, happy Thanksgiving. If you're not, well, maybe you thank those around you for all those special things that happen in your life. For me, going home on a Friday evening, and I've said this at the Access Group recently, it's amazing just to switch on a Friday evening and just to be inspired by what we see on television. But of course, some of us see this inspiration each day in our campuses. And I feel slightly like an imposter here today because the real champions are my colleagues that are on this call who each day tirelessly work in the institutions across higher education in the system to support our students. But the question is, I suppose, why are we doing this? Why is this important? I'm a professor of zoology and in particular my area of ecology. And the central axiom of ecology is diversity begets stability. So the whole idea of diversity is something that's embedded deeply in our systems across the globe, whether it's plant or animal systems. And I think what I'm trying to say here is that the importance of diversity is deeply embedded. And if we don't have diversity, we are really a much, much poorer environment. We're much more poorer higher education system and more poor by not having the greatest diversity. So today is about celebrating, encouraging and enriching diversity. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to open this discussion, recognizing the significant achievements of here and there. Huge progress has been made in increasing access to higher education, but our work is not finished. And those of us involved in education know it's never finished. We must continue to push the boundaries. We must continue to value our colleagues around us. And as mentioned by Shane, I have the privilege of chairing the IUA Access Advisory Group. I've just taken over from a great giant, Professor Etna Guilfoyle of DCU. And Etna, I'm really grateful to you for all that you've done at the higher education with IUA and colleagues right across the sector in the last number of years. And I'm heartened to see the commitment to widening access to higher education by all. And at the recent meeting that we had ourselves, and many of the speakers that you hear today are active, committed and making huge contributions. And I really want to accelerate that, because what we've seen during COVID is things that are important have become accelerated. Across our campuses have become more diverse as a result of the success of access admission routes like here and there, as I've mentioned. We've seen the statistics by the Minister. They're shared by the IUA in the last number of weeks, and they're really impressive. However, admissions to our universities are only part of the journey. Fantastic, we can get students admitted. We now need to ensure that our campuses are inclusive. What does inclusive mean? It means that students feel part of our campus, part of our community. They feel welcome, they feel valued, and they feel equal. Students need to be comfortable being themselves, and the joy of a university is being different as part of being a university student. And we want you to be different. We want you to celebrate your difference. Not having to pretend you're someone else or to blend in. Everyone will benefit from you being different and all of us being different. If all our students can participate and contribute fully in the social, cultural and academic life of the university, we will be all the richer for it. So what the Minister says, we've got to systemize this in the institutions. We've got to make sure that our systems support diversity. But I would caution that we not only got to do that, we've got to make sure we don't lose the individual touch that's required for each of our students, So systemize, yes, but let's not use that individual touch. Christina, I suppose you'll forgive me for mentioning Christina from University College Cork and my uni life. It was just hugely inspiring. I see Courtney's here today and other colleagues. Alpha, I thought all your presentation, I could call you all out, and my great friend Joanna Reardon is here today. I feel I'm among celebrities here today. And I mean that sincerely, because you are the role models. If you can't see it, you can't be it. You are showing what it can be, and you can show what you can do. Inclusion is key to our success. We want all our students to feel part of the university community. In order to do this, we need to make sure the physical environment, the teaching environment, the internet, the technology is all available to us. Our employers now are recognizing the importance of this too, recruiting graduates that are increasingly recognizing the value of diverse and inclusive workforce. We've seen this on the ground in the University College Cork, and I'm sure you're seeing it in all your institutions, with significant engagement in multinationals, regional employers, in our employability forum, and continue to grow for a number of companies mentoring students through our disabilities support service mentoring initiative. Our access and disability services have developed innovative, successful approaches supporting inclusion of students in our university environments. And many of us have mainstreamed good practice from access service across the university in different areas. We now need to recognise that inclusion is not the role of access disability service, it is all our role. Don't be pointing down the corridor to our access office and to disability office. Look into your own heart and say, what will I do to make it an inclusive university? I thank you for the opportunity today. I wish you well. I think we've come a long way, but we've further to go. And please be open and honest about how we might make our institutions better today. Shane, thank you for the opportunity to address you today. Colleagues, have a wonderful afternoon. I'm looking forward to hearing you further on your deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you. Powerful words, Professor John O'Halloran there. I think that's a fantastic sentiment. Diversity begets stability. I'm going to steal that line and use it in the future with your permission. Now, we have 4 short presentations of initiatives that showcase institutional and systemic change and have brought about real change. And by the way, our presenters are going to stay online answering any questions that you may have throughout the chat. So just use the chat or the Q&A functions for the duration. They can answer your questions. So we've got a number of speakers here. If I could ask them to strictly keep to the 5-minute mark, because we're keen to finish as close to 1:45 as is possible. So we're going to begin with the DCU Autism Friendly University Initiative and its coordinator, Fiona Early. Fiona.
Thank you for that introduction, Shane. I'm just going to share my screen now. So I'm just going to start off with a little bit of background into developing an autism-friendly university in DCU. This started 3 years ago. The project is an initiative between DCU and As I Am, and it was based on a research report. Out of the research report came 43 key performance indicators based on 8 principles of what makes an autism-friendly university, and a project coordinator, which is my role. Some of the main issues arising in the report for facing autistic students, this is a very brief summary, are 1, the transition into university, generally difficulties in settling in. Secondly, stigma, fear of disclosing an autism diagnosis, and that results on the level of supports accessed by students. Different communication styles within the autistic community, and this can result in academic and also social difficulties. The environment, the sensory environment can be very challenging for people on the autistic spectrum, and this can result in physical, academic and social difficulties. So what has DCU done to address these issues? This is a brief summary of some of our actions. In relation to transitioning into DCU, we've created a web page which is specifically for students in first year. The videos are compiled by autistic students, offering advice to autistic students in everything in relation to settling in and their first year. Open and orientation days are autism sensory friendly. They're live streamed, there's quiet spaces and quiet hours, and there is video information sent out in advance of these events. The newly founded Neurodivergent Society are also there to act as mentors for new students, and they help them develop their social life within DCU. In relation to reducing stigma, a lot of training is happening. For DCU and the wider community, we are regularly providing training with a key emphasis on social, academic and sensory differences within the autistic community. For DCU, some staff in particular, we offer autism and mental health awareness. For the general student body, we've provided guidelines on promoting social engagement of their autistic peers. And also for the general student body, we provide workshops that focus on diversity and thinking, which is really useful for students working in group work. Autism awareness events are led by the general student body and also the autistic students in DCU. The Neurodivergent Society was founded in 2019, and members of the committee and ordinary committee members have been guest speakers at seminars and institutes of education. They lead on awareness campaigns and they link with other universities, and also really focusing on positive media coverage. For example, the Neurodivergent Society appeared in Changing Ireland. In relation to the environment, we are working on a few things at the moment. We are developing autism-friendly guidelines with a lead researcher in this, and these guidelines are going to inform future building that happens in DCU, and that's to ensure that the facilities are sensory friendly. We have installed sensory pods, which are well used by students and also staff in DCU. We have designated quiet spaces. We have escape hatches, and we are also working on a navigation app which will provide indoor and outdoor seamless navigation. Thank you very much.
I'm still muted. Sorry, thank you so much for that, Fiona. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating what you're doing in DCU, and it's a real eye-opener. Thank you indeed for that, and thank you for being so prompt as well, Fiona. Okay, next up we have Dr. Anna Kelly, Director of Access and Lifelong Learning at UCD, to talk about the UCD University for All initiative.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Shane, for that introduction. Colleagues, this morning or this afternoon, I'm going to talk to you about UCD's University for All initiative, how we have reshaped access and inclusion and very much addressed the strategic priority that the Minister spoke about. So the question that has been posed in this seminar this afternoon is, how do we make inclusion a collective responsibility, ensuring the pockets of good practice are implemented on a system-wide basis? And we have the answer to that. We think it's by making access and inclusion everybody's business, and we do that through our University for All initiative. So this afternoon, I'm going to share with you a small number of keys to doing that and realising that ambition to become a University for All. And like Professor O'Halloran said, I'm going to begin by describing what is a University for All, and he spoke about belonging. And we are very clear that University for All means we're conveying a message to our students that regardless of their background or circumstances, that they would feel welcome, belong and are valued. And in doing that, we're dispelling the myth of a traditional university student. And let's be honest, there is the myth of the traditional student, but we know we have the evidence to show that we have a diverse group of students. And we have a deceptively simple concept underneath that, in that we are treating all students with parity of esteem, and we're treating a student as a student as a student. So we're moving from othering, from special initiatives, from a siloed approach to an institution, equality of provision, support for all. So that's essentially the message that we're trying to convey. And the initiative itself is systemic, and the Minister used that word. So it's a systemic response to mainstream inclusion, making it everybody's business. It involves everybody in the community, academic and professional staff. It impacts on every aspect of campus life: teaching, learning, buildings, technology, and all services for students must and need to be designed around the needs of all from the outset, rather than the needs of the group in the middle and then thinking about those who are on the margins. So we're thinking about access as beyond entry and beyond admissions to the inclusiveness of our campus and the inclusiveness of the experience that students have. So how did we move from that concept to implementing it? What was our game plan? And our game plan for enabling institutional transformation, and that's what University for All It's institution-wide and institution transformation. And I shared 3 slides and 3 insights with you. One of the keys, an extremely important key to achieving institutional change, is to have the governance and oversight conditions right. So this initiative is overseen at the highest level by the Registrar and Deputy President. And there are 2 university committees, again, who have oversight on this, the University Widening Participation Committee and a dotted line to the EDI Committee. And all of those strands of senior governance are chaired and managed by the senior academics in the university. The process is enabled by Access and Lifelong Learning, which is the department that I lead. So we were specifically given that remit a number of years ago to enable the university to reach the target to become a university for all. And the implementation structures, and we did a lot of thinking and a lot of research as to the structures, and all the evidence points to not duplicating the structures, but to use the structures. So the college principal and deans have overarching responsibility, and there's a local lead in a program or in a unit, and that person is the WP Widening Participation Representative. So that's an important building block to ensure a university for all, or an inclusive university. The second second piece of insight that I will share with you is the Toolkit for Inclusive Higher Education Institutions. And over the past several years, we have done a wide consultation process. We found significant commitment, but a real absence of know-how and confidence. And that prompted Dr. Lisa Padden and myself to write the guide, to write the book, to write a tome that would be useful to people as they try to follow this journey. And it addresses the policy and the foundations that are in all our universities, and the 4 key pillars: program, curriculum, teaching, student supports, the physical campus, and the IT systems. That's the second piece of information. And the final piece of critical infrastructure is the data. Professor O'Halloran is a scientist, knows the value of data, and we in UCD know the value of data. And significant work has been done by Dr. Barbara Fleming and again by Dr. Padden on the data, and it's essential to drive change. John Cotter, who is a management authority, talks about creating a burning platform. Unless people understand where students are in terms of how they get in, the progress they're making, and where they move on to, what their participation levels, and they won't be able to engage fully or understand what's being asked of them. So the title of this seminar today is Future Ireland, and I think the Future Ireland needs higher education and universities in particular to demonstrate inclusion in action, where our student population reflects the diversity and the social mix, as the National Access Plan says, but also the National Access Plan says that access and inclusion is everybody's business. So I leave you with the photographs of my 2 colleagues who are part of the project team, and to invite you all to the launch of our University for All seminar series on the 8th of December at 12 o'clock, and the link is there, when we will be discussing data and the importance of it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you indeed for that. Anna, access is everybody's initiative, a really great message, I think, to be sending out. Let's move on now to Colin Downs, Access Manager at IUA, to talk about the National Dare and HEAR schemes. Colin. Colin, I can't hear you. Are you there? Okay. Okay, we are not hearing from Colin. Just while we're waiting for Colin, we might just...
Hello?
Oh, we have you, Colin. Yeah, we have you. Great.
Okay,
No
apologies for that, everybody. Let me restart. Thanks a million for having me along today. Thanks for taking time out your busy lunch breaks to be with us today. So I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about the future of Dare and HEAR, but in order to look forward, we need to look back a little bit and take a quick look at the journey so far. Pre-2009, Dare and HEAR kicked off around 2010, and pre-2009, each of the universities in Ireland had its own separate parallel access schemes, and The numbers, relatively speaking, had stagnated due to the kind of splintered approaches. And concurrently, the Department of Education had developed a DESH strategy for inclusion of students in for development of opportunities in higher education. And though the number of schools within that strategy was broader than that of the reach of the universities at the time. So the 7 universities in the then DIT developed a common set of application procedures for trying to address issues related to access for students with disabilities and underrepresented socioeconomic groups. The result of having a common set of criteria was that there was greater visibility and easier to communicate those criteria rather than having a separate set for each HEI, and there was less problems for students when they came to make those applications. As a result of those schemes, over the course of time, we developed a close working relationship with the Central Admissions Office, and kudos to them because their capacity to process applications has been really critical in the development of there and here and the mainstreaming of them nationally. So predominantly these schemes are now essentially run, operated and developed by HEIs themselves and in partnership with the Central Admissions Office. At the time we started with 8 HEIs, we're now up to 25 participating HEIs into their scheme, and we encompass 11 categories of disability, prioritising those with sensory and physical disabilities because those groups are particularly underrepresented in higher education. And just to have a quick look at the numbers, to kind of give a snapshot of where how DARE has increased. In 2010, we had 385 students accept offers into higher education through the schemes, and in 2020 we've had 3,148. So an exponential growth in terms of DARE. And in terms of here, we're at 24 participating HEIs, and this encapsulates all of the institutes of technology in the country, the teacher training colleges and all universities. And we're up to 24 participating HEIs there, as I've mentioned. In terms of the numbers of students being offered places there were 1,000 in 2010, and we're over 3,000 in 2020 accepting offers. Where we intend to take this in the future of there and here is that here is currently under review at the moment. And what we're trying to do is really identify those who are experiencing exclusion due to higher education for socioeconomic reasons. And this could be a number of groups. We know that only 1% of travellers nationally access higher education. There are similar figures around Roma participation. We know that teen parents and those who are or have experienced homelessness, for example, those groups are groups who are not necessarily specifically targeted by the scheme. So we're looking at those groups at the moment, and also ways of identifying those students. How do we identify them in the system and make that system communicatable easily to those students and operationalize it then. Overall, the numbers of review points for both there and here students have grown massively. And what we would like to see in the future also is, and this is not necessarily something that's under remit of any of our groups at the moment, is more personal experience, personal opinion, is that, and it's been expressed earlier on, is that we look beyond opportunities for admission to higher education. And whilst those opportunities for admission to higher education have been excellent and developed really well, and we've seen HEIs and some of my colleagues have spoken earlier on about initiatives around including those students on a national basis, we should really be looking at the completion and graduation of those access cohorts, access to mobility opportunities, including Erasmus, and then postgraduate and career opportunities. So looking towards the gamut of the college experience and making sure that that access is a full college experience for every student, irrespective of their background. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you indeed for that, Colin. Really interesting and insightful presentation. By the way, I should remind you of the hashtag. If you are posting anything on this hashtag, you can see it there behind me. I think hashtag IAV future of Ireland. And just to let you know, by the way, that this session is being recorded, but I'm sure you realise that anyway. Now, let's get to our fourth presentation. It looks at NUI Galway's Inclusive Learning Initiative. It's presented by Dr. Siobhan Quinlivan, Vice Dean for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at the College of Business, Public Policy and Law, NUI Galway. Siobhan.
Thank you very much, Shane. So first, I'd like to thank the IUA for having me here today, and I'm here to present on inclusive learning at NUI Galway, and very specifically about two projects we have in NUI Galway. Okay, now here we go. So we have two inclusive learning projects. One is an undergraduate project in the College of Business, Public Policy and Law, which is funded by the NUI Galway Student Project Fund. And that college has three schools: the School of Law, the School of Business, and Shannon College as well, so the hotel and catering. We also have a postgraduate project, which is the College of Business, Public Policy and Law as well. And we also have the School of Mathematics and Statistics, applied maths, applied mathematics, as well as the School of Physics. And that's funded by the National Forum for the Enhancement of Teaching and Learning in Higher Education. And I think what's important to kind of point out at this point is that we've tried to cover the whole of the university in the sense that we have a professional course in Shannon Hotel and Catering, we have arts, humanities and social sciences in the School of Business and Law, and we have STEM subjects in maths and physics. And this presentation is going to address the common themes in both projects very briefly, and they are really centering the student voice, enhancing the capacity and empowering staff, and incentivizing best practice. So very briefly, because other people have mentioned it, but just to give a sense of the context in NUI Galway, there was a significant increase in international and intercultural students, increase in the number of students that are registered with the Access Centre, which includes disability support services, and an increase in transgender students. And there is research to show that the impact of exclusionary practices negatively impacts on students, on their retention and on completion rates. And NUI Galway has a new strategic plan, which is underpinned by respect. It is a respect for all, respect for teaching and research, respect for equality, for inclusion and diversity in all its forms. And it's in that context that the projects operate. So for us, it was very important that students were a huge part of this project. So they are on the project team, they are central to the project development and design, and are active participants throughout both projects. The student voice is also centered through data collection. We've been undertaking surveys. We're heading into our third year of surveys, focus groups and interviews to get a really deep sense of what the student experience is. And the student panels are also kind of, annually we've tried to work with staff and build awareness among staff. And as part of that, students have assisted by providing a student panel talking about their experiences within NUI Galway, the very, very positive experiences, as well as the very negative experiences on occasion. And finally, on the student voice, the students themselves are also central in nomination for the Dean's Award. So the recognition of achievement by staff is controlled to a large extent by students. Students decide who gets that benefit. So again, the student voice and centering that voice was hugely important to us. The second element is, I don't for a second believe that academic staff want to exclude their students. I don't believe that they seek to exclude their students, but sometimes they're overworked and overwhelmed and maybe not aware of what they're doing. So we have tried to enhance the capacities of academic staff by providing very practical supports to them. In doing so, we have had workshops and webinars on universal design and learning, intercultural teaching, Ally, which I'll talk about in a moment, creating inclusive teaching environments, decolonizing the curriculum. We've also tried to make this a self-sustaining project so that this isn't for the duration of the life of this project, but that it continues afterwards. So we have invested in universal design and learning, and I know Ahead are speaking later. We now have 35 academic staff completing the digital badge, and they hopefully then will become trainers and they will start the cycle of training new academic staff. We also purchased Ally software tool, which is this tool that effectively makes us use, when we're using Blackboard, it allows academics or the lecturers or the teaching staff to make their documents accessible as possible. And it guides you through that process. For students, students can take their can download the documents or the materials that are provided by their lecturers in a variety of formats, so making it as accessible as possible for the students. And you can see for the numbers, we've had 3,000 launches of instructor feedback, 37,000 downloads, that this is really practical, and we only purchased it last year. We've also created a Blackboard resource, so everything we get in relation to inclusive teaching and learning. We've created a Blackboard course for staff, and all staff that teach in the university may access that. And just to, I suppose, advertise now as well, we have an inclusive teaching symposium next April, and we hope you all will come to that. But this is all about helping staff to be inclusive. It's also about encouraging change and recognizing achievement. So one of the things we did was to make it something that people wanted to do. So we've recognized that. So we created a Dean's Award for Inclusive Teaching and Learning. There's an individual award and a team award. It is nominated by students, and in the first year we had 56 nominations, in the second 71. And again, it's this idea of recognizing good practice, rewarding good practice, but also incentivizing good practice. Because if you have a teaching award on your CV, that's good for you. So it's about trying to kind of close the circle, listen to the students, respond to the students, enable the staff, and incentivize that good practice. I think in line with all the other speakers today, there are challenges in this. You need to be flexible and adapt. You need broad buy-in, multiple stakeholders, and we're very fortunate in that. We have students, we have professional services staff, we have learning technologists, we have academics, we've had huge buy-in from the university, and that allows us to continue with this project. So a bit like other members, I am actually going to leave us today as well with a picture of the project team. We have students, staff, learning technologists, members of the admin staff, all involved in the project. And I think that's what makes this a success within the university. So I will stop now and let the next section begin.
Okay, thanks so much for that, Siobhan. I think you're absolutely right. Broad buy-in is the key. I think we can all agree with that. Great work clearly being done in NUI Galway. Thanks indeed. Our presenters are going to stay online answering any questions you may have through the chat and Q&A function. So if you do have questions, do pop them through. We're going to though now move on to our first panel today. We're really happy to have the student voice represented today by three of the stars of the IUA RTE My Uni Life documentary. What a brilliant, brilliant program. It's been an inspirational program. It's been a huge success, huge viewership. I only wish we had this viewership, the same listenership on my breakfast show every morning. I'd be a happy and a much richer man if I did. 245,000 viewers per episode. Great feedback on social media and from schools, and great to see the new Ulster champions so well represented here today. Don't worry, Cathal, we won't mention the Leinster final. Now with us today are Alpha Ike, sorry Cathal, I couldn't resist that as a loud man. Alpha Ike, computer science and software engineering student at Maynooth University. Cathal Blake, a DCU doctoral student focusing on young onset dementia, and Courtney McGrath, business and sociology student at Trinity College Dublin. They don't really need any introduction though. Courtney, I might start with you first. Just tell us about the route you came into the university, and I suppose what was the one thing that had the most influence on whether you went to university or not?
Thank you for having me and for the introduction, Shane. So the main thing that influenced whether I was going to university or not was the DARE scheme. So because I'm profoundly deaf, it did have an impact on my learning in secondary school. So to be able to qualify for DARE was a brilliant opportunity to study in third level. And also when researching colleges, I made sure to look at the disability service websites of the supports that would be available to me. It is important for universities to ensure that this information is easy to find for students, as it can make a difference to whether students choose to study here.
Okay, all right, thanks indeed for that. Cathal, I suppose, look, the same question to you. Actually, Courtney, just come back a little bit. Tell us about your route to going to college. I mean, those of us who saw the program, watched it with great interest, maybe noticed, but it's a really good story.
So just the general story?
Yeah, your journey to getting to college.
Okay, yeah, so I applied to the DARE scheme. So I you know, my journey started from, you know, I have been profoundly deaf for most of my life, and I knew that to come to college I probably wouldn't get the points for that. So getting into Dare was, you know, brilliant for me. So I feel like if I didn't have Dare, it would have been, you know, a lot harder to get into college. I wouldn't have been probably studying in the course I love, studying Trinity today. So that kind of is the story of how I got into college. Just Dare had been a godsend, and I wouldn't be in final year doing a course I love if it wasn't for it.
Okay, thanks for that, Courtney. We'll come back to you in a minute. Look, Cathal, I suppose same question to you. Just tell us a little bit about your story, the route you came into university, and I suppose the thing that most influenced whether or not you did go to university.
Well, thanks a million, Shane. Thanks for that fantastic introduction. And as a Meath man, I'm sure that you loud guys probably think you're going to win the All-Ireland next year. Now there's a completely heart on board.
We can dream.
I'd like to thank the IUA for giving me the opportunity to attend this event today. And my route into university, Shane, was through the mature student route. So I filled in the CAO form, but then the mature student route takes you down a different access rather than you're not competing with school leavers, so you're not worried about points and stuff like that. I also have to point out that initially I done a further education and training course with the VTOS and Drogheda, so the work they carry out is unbelievable in preparing students to enter third level education. And that's where I learned all about being a mature student, and then any grants or bursaries that were available. So without the work that the further education and training organisations do, I probably wouldn't have even heard of the term mature student or even contemplated college at that stage.
Okay, all right. Alpha, many of us saw your story on my uni life. Just take us back. I know that there was a great photograph in the documentary. I think you were attending your older brother's graduation, and that kind of inspired you.
Yeah, but first, can I just say a big I've been watching even Cathal, I know Courtney are here, but even Christina's and Sean's story, it's really uplifting just watching, just as a viewer like everyone else, watching everyone's story. I think that's really powerful for me, just being inspired by the people around the show. And for me, the picture, to just answer your question, the picture of my brother going to the college and graduating, just to be able to to see something or something closer to home, being able to do that as well, it keeps you going. Just visibility that, okay, at least I see that it can be done. And yeah, I think that's a very poignant part of my journey anyway.
Okay, and specifically on the thing that had the most influence on whether you went to university or not. Talk us through that process a little bit, Alfred.
So for my journey, I obviously finished school, but I went into Cavan Institute for a year. So I came through the VTech route just because I had to save money for a year, so I worked for the most time. So I got into Maynooth through Access. And yeah, that's pretty much how I got into college.
Okay, you had your heart set on Maynooth University as well.
Yeah, I think I only had Maynooth in my CAO because I felt like everywhere else just wasn't gonna happen for me personally, because I went there on a shadowing day, which is organized by Access, and I was like, yeah, this is the place for me, so I didn't bother to find anywhere else.
Okay, all right. Courtney, can I come back to you? Look, so much inspirational, so many messages of hope we've heard from today. But I think, as the minister said, we're making progress all the time, but we're nowhere near there yet, and we have to build on that progress. So, can I ask you, if there was one more thing, and maybe there isn't, but if there was one more thing that you could identify to support your educational journey, what would that be?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say that can the government and the HEA commit to ensuring colleges are fully accessible to all? There are many examples of inaccessibility and lack of inclusion everywhere. I am on the board of AHEAD and chair meetings with Students with Disabilities Advisory Group, and I have learned of many issues impacting students with disabilities across third level institutions. And with everything being online, so online learning due to COVID, this needs to be, there is inaccessibility there, and this needs to be addressed urgently. Colleges should not be allowed to buy inaccessible products such as Zoom packages that do not have automatic captioning, as this can exclude so many students with disabilities. And as students with disabilities, we are experts by experience. Professionals and academics must ensure that co-production with students with disabilities, as we must be included in conversations of change. So thank you.
That's really interesting, Courtney. And like, hands up, I suppose things that I wouldn't have thought of, and maybe that's the problem. Maybe we all just need to think a little bit more. But a lot of that, I'm guessing, Courtney, is about, and we've touched, I think Siobhan touched on this as well, about getting buy-in from everyone and getting feedback from everyone, because it's only then that you can actually identify what those shortcomings are.
Yes, no, exactly. I just think, like, you know, as students that have disabilities or have had any struggles, we know what that's like. So if we are included, I think change will happen a bit quicker, and just having our input would be, you know, essential for change to happen.
Okay. Cathal, can I ask you the same question? If there was one thing that would kind of help your educational journey even further, what would you recommend?
I suppose maybe coming at it from a slightly different perspective than Courtney and Alpha as a mature student. I have to say, first of all, as a mature student, the financial bursaries that are out there in regards to grants and back education allowances and things like that are fantastic. However, as a mature student, we may have maybe different financial responsibilities to, we'll say, school leavers, where you could have mortgages, you could have childcare, stuff like that. So obviously, more money would always help, more financial assistance. I think too, maybe getting the message out there from the higher education institutions and from government in general to mature students that, you know, you can go back to education, because there's a lot of mature students, and I was one of those, who believed that when you didn't go to university at like 18, 19 or 20, that you had missed your opportunity, and that the chance to go back as a mature student, like I hadn't even heard that term, mature student, up until a year or two before I decided to go back. So yeah, the whole area of making people aware that individuals can go back at any age, and age shouldn't be a barrier, you know, and help people facilitate going back.
Carl, I think that's a great point. Actually, I've heard Jim McGuinness, the former Donegal manager, talking about this and talking about going back as a mature student. I think it was to Tralee IT, and walking in the door and kind of wanting to flee because he felt, I actually don't belong here. Tackling that's a big thing, isn't it, in terms of encouraging people to come back?
I think it is, yeah. I mean, each individual student, no matter what age you are, is going to have some sort of an issue with going to university, because it's such a big step. You know, everybody is on their own individual journey, but particularly from a mature student perspective, I touch on that in the documentary, that, you know, are you going to be seen as some sort of an oddity, and are the school leavers, for want of a better term, sort of, you know, pointing you out and what's this old lad doing here in university? So maybe making people a little bit more aware that it's actually not like that. When you get into the institution, and I'm sure Courtney and Alpha can speak for their institutions as well, the help is there, and you're not made feel like that. But looking from the outside in, you don't know that till you get in. So just making an awareness campaign around that would definitely help, I think.
Okay, all right, Carl, super stuff. Thank you. Alpha, just to finish with you, same question. If there was one thing that would help your educational journey, what would you like to see?
For me personally, I just think that just as much increase in mental health services as possible would be the best thing for students. You know, going through college, work and education during a pandemic comes with its own stresses, and I feel like as much of a push towards that direction as possible will definitely not just benefit myself, but just everyone else. So, yeah.
It's interesting, because when I went to college in a different millennium, to you, mental health services wasn't really something that was on the agenda at all. Like, what is it like now? Is there, you're saying more needs to be done. Like, is there much support there at the moment for students, do you think?
Oh, they definitely have come a long way. Like, I know for Minute, we do great work for anyone, just mature students there, here, but just all across the board, the whole of Ireland is just crying out for more to be done. And I think we can just see of what just the ramifications that they have had in everybody's community. We can all just see it now, clear as day. So I feel like if we can just try and protect just the younger students who've gone through a rough time with the Leaving Cert and they don't have as much life experience to fall back on, I think that would be just my one wish. I think
Courtney, just to finish with you, you were kind of nodding your head there when Alpha was speaking, and I know you're involved with the Students' Union. Is that something you're conscious of in your role?
Could you repeat the question? Sorry,
I just saw you were nodding your head along with Alpha, that issue of greater support for mental health services. I was just wondering, in your capacity in the Students' Union, is that something you're conscious of at the moment?
Yes, and especially with, there's not a lot of, there's free counselling in Trinity, and a lot the waiting list for them supports can be too long that students are discouraged not to use them. So I think there needs to be, more focus that more students need to avail of these supports, especially during time with COVID. Everybody's not having the best time, so there definitely needs to be more supports for students with mental health issues. So I think for all universities, I say it has the same issue, so it definitely needs to be looked at further.
Okay, all right, thanks indeed for that, Courtney. Lots of messages coming up here. Guys, your input and life experience is key for policy and decision makers. Such important issues: accessibility, mental health and finance. Another listener saying, well said, Cathal, promoting higher education for all regardless of age, breaking down the narrative which is largely used around undergraduate students, Leaving Cert students, via a national campaign and through HEI marketing offices, and not just Access and WP offices, is vital. Guys, that was fascinating. Look, you've captured the nation's hearts, I think, and I don't think that's an exaggeration with your appearances. I'm really looking forward to seeing the final episode tomorrow evening, RT1 7:30. If any of you haven't seen it, it's worth checking back on. It's absolutely brilliant. A big thank you to Alpha, to Cathal and to Courtney. Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks, Shane.
Thanks for having us on.
Thank you, guys. Another Keith, thanks indeed for your message. Brilliant to hear these insights and perspectives from the panelists. Thanks to all. Yeah, well said, Keith. I don't think there's any more to say on that. You sum it up perfectly. Let's get to the final part of our webinar today. It's a discussion with our practitioner and advocacy panel. We're going to discuss the ways in which we can make inclusion a collective responsibility. I think we were talking about that a little bit earlier, and ensure that pockets of good practice become the norm, become implemented system-wide. So joining us today, Joanna Reardon. She needs no introduction, former UCC criminology student. Joanna is now a sports journalist. She'll read her stuff at the Irish Times and other publications on women in sport and disability and sport. We've Dara Ryder, CEO of AHEAD Ireland. AHEAD, of course, the independent non-profit organisation working to create inclusive environments in education and employment for people with disabilities. The main focus of their work is further education and training, higher education and graduate employment. We're also joined by Dr. Anna Kelly. You heard from Anna a little bit earlier, and Dr. Patrick Ryan, VP of Student Engagement and the Director of the Doctoral Programme in Clinical Psychology at the University of Limerick. Alongside his academic work, Dr. Ryan continues to work as a clinical practitioner in the area of mental health in adolescents and adults. Guys, you're very welcome to the panel. Thanks a lot for your time today. Anna, can I start with you first? How do we ensure access and inclusion are a priority at institutional level? And what lessons can we learn? I know you're doing a lot of work on this in Belfield. What lessons can we learn from UCD's experience?
Thanks, Shane. There are a number of lessons, and some of them I shared in a presentation earlier. But I suppose one of the things I didn't say is that this journey to become an inclusive university, or a university for all, as we call it, doesn't happen by accident. It has to be planned. It has to be managed. It has to be resourced, and it has to be governed. So by each of those, teasing out each of those pieces, you get perspective on what has to be done. So it's not about piecemeal, it's about taking a broad perspective in the university-wide process. So that's the first lesson I would say, that it has to be planned, has to be resourced, has to be governed, and not relying on champions. I think up to now we have relied too much on champions. When I say governed, I mean it has to be embedded and integrated into the role of everybody in the university, and it has to be resourced. Because the resources that UCD allocated to access and lifelong learning to drive this change initiative are significant. So that's a key to ensuring that it happens in a university.
Is that hard to do when you're all so busy with the day-to-day stuff?
I suppose I should say no, but clearly yes. And I think there are a couple of key things. I mean, if we believe it's important, and we passionately believe it's important, and not only we believe that it's important, it's part of the National Access Plan. And it's an objective, and you heard the Minister say that progress has been made, but it has not been fully implemented. And she quoted where statistics had made significant progress. And there has been some, but less progress. And we have addressed that objective. And one of the keys, and I'll come back to my presentation, is carving out the time and the resources to work on that objective. I mean, if we're serious about meeting the National Access Plan objectives, well, then we try to meet them all. So we have carved out time to do that, and we have allocated resources to it. But that didn't happen just because one day somebody woke up and said, yeah, we should do this. We had in access and lifelong learning, we had to, I suppose, begin a process of persuading, of convincing our colleagues throughout the university that this was the way to go, that diversity is a good thing. And John told us that diversity and
stability. I had that learned off, Anna.
Are really important. So not everybody has heard those arguments. So persuading people that diversity, access and inclusion are important. And in a university, in my experience, nothing happens unless you have the evidence. We're a research intensive institution. So unless you can produce the evidence, and by the evidence, I mean two types of evidence we produced. We produced the data on the student participation, which I alluded to in my presentation, but we also produced other evidence. I did research myself into the implementation of this inclusion objective across the 7 universities. And then my colleagues, Dr. Fleming and Dr. Padden and myself have done baseline data collection, surveying the attitudes of faculty and staff.
Okay.
So we have approached it from a very professional point of view, and it's a long-term project. It will not be done by Christmas.
Yeah, no, very, very good point. Very good point. Dara, can I bring you in, Dara Ryder? Look, we heard from students, obviously, who benefited from DARE today on our panel. Just tell us about the kind of impact these programs have had there.
Well, they've had an absolutely enormous impact, and I suppose the fact remains there are still significant barriers there for students with disabilities in education, in terms of the impact of disability on their opportunities, and in particular at primary and secondary in turning what is their true ability into the kind of measurable CAO points that are currently the standard in there. So there's been a key tool for higher education institutions to respond to that. I mean, in terms of DARE, it's really leveled the playing field for enormous numbers of students to come through and access the higher education system. Just to give you some context, our own research in AHEAD highlights an increase of over 220% in just the last 10 years. So that's 10,800 more students who are registering for support in the last 10 years than they were previously. So they now represent 6.2% of the total student population, and that's just those who are registered for support. So the HEA itself estimates that when you include those who don't register for support but disclose through the Equal Access Survey, that percentage is roughly double that. So it's about the 12% mark. And we anticipate again that the figures are much higher than that in terms of students who would choose not to disclose and not to label themselves through either of those processes.
Okay,
so that's
yeah, really impressive figures there. Can I ask you, and Anna kind of touched on this already, but the kind of changes in culture and practice that you would like to see at higher education?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I suppose what I'd say regarding disability, it echoes John's words from the opening. We are moving to a model where the responsibility for support predominantly lay with the Disability or Access Office to a much more holistic approach. So inclusion is everybody's business. John has made that clear. The janitor, the lecturer, the librarian, the disability officer, right up to the president. So in the past, we would have relied very heavily on that idea of the individual add-on support. So we do it one time, one change, one time for one student, and then we do it all again when the next one comes through the door. But our understanding is shifting now, and we're kind of internalizing that as a sector. I think that the barriers to learning are mostly not located within the individuals, but in the design of how we go about designing the physical, digital environments, and indeed the way we design programs themselves. I think the great David Rose once famously said, your curriculum has disabilities, and I think that's something we should internalize. We're very lucky that we have established evidence-based frameworks to help us address these issues and inclusively design for all. So in terms of our physical and digital environments, we have universal design itself, the framework for that, UD, and in terms of teaching and learning interactions, we have universal design for learning, or UDL. So these are approaches that are not focused on disability, but look rather at variability and just recognize disability as one facet of that. So I think it's really about building more independence, more agency, more choice in for students, so that a bit. And that's really the kind of moral imperative there. But there's also financial and an operational imperative and a demographic impairment, because it's just not sustainable model to rely on that one-to-one support only. I mean, that said, I suppose I just want to highlight, because it's been all the talk of mainstreaming today, the importance of those one-to-one supports available as an addendum to that. We can't do everything through design, through mainstream design. So those available through the Disability Support Service and the amazing professionals who deliver them are really important. But
it's a balancing act.
Exactly, and by implementing UD and UDL, what we're really trying to do is reduce the need for as many of those individual supports as possible by making the delivery itself in the mainstream much more inclusive. But we need to recognise that need for the high quality, well-funded, individualised supports to support the mainstream initiatives too.
Okay, what was that line? Your curriculum has disabilities. Is that how you phrase it?
That's it. Yeah.
It's a great way of looking at it, turning things on its head. It's really good. Look, let's swing down to the Midwest. Patrick Ryan, University of Limerick. I always think it's a city and it's a college that's on the cutting edge, and you have a really good record of working with systemically disadvantaged communities there. Tell us how would you like to see that work evolve, Patrick?
I think there are two streams to how this can evolve. We have been very successful in, suppose, bringing to life ideas and concepts, and the success of our programs has come out of a range of regional partnerships, even with other third level institutions in the city. So I think the first stream of the evolution of this is to, now that we've got the concept operationalized, it's to move away from the big picture and almost coming into a more individualized resource scoping picture where we can see that people who come from disadvantaged communities or have variabilities that in the past wouldn't have been recognized in a third level system, that we can pick this up much earlier than the application and admission part of into third level. And in some way, I think I'd like to see that we're taking the structures that we have both on campus in the university and engaging with our community partners to see, can we become the nudge energy in communities for people who are thinking about further education, don't know enough about it, and we can just row in behind them and gently nudge them with a very explicit objective around seeing them on campus in a few years down the road. So I think we're going to come, hopefully come away and be able to put resources into that. And the second piece for me comes from my own experience as a clinician. I've always said that my own training, what it did was it stopped me from causing problems and making mistakes. But in terms of being proactive in helping people and guiding people and advising people, that comes from me learning from the people that have come to me looking for advice. They have taught me almost everything I know about, in my case, mental health practice. We need to use the resource that come from people, the likes of whom we've heard from earlier, who've been on the My Uni Life program. Those people teach us way beyond anything to do with disadvantage, disability or variability. They teach us about resilience. They teach us about compassion. They teach us about problem solving. They teach us how to manage day-to-day hassles and life hassles. They teach us the stuff that make us successful. So I think this stream of evolution needs to come away from that the person who comes from disadvantage or disability needs something done to them or done with them, to actually they can enrich and enhance the work that we're supposed to be expert or doing. So there's a co-expertise evolution.
Yeah, well said. I suppose they teach us what can be done as well. Just before, and Joanne, I'm conscious, I want to bring you in. Just before I do bring it, sorry for keeping you waiting. Before I bring in Joanne, I'm just curious, Patrick, that the point, Dara made a great point about that balance between having, the kind of services there, if that's the right word, or maybe that's a clumsy way of expressing it, but also the kind of the mainstream services as well. How do you what's your approach in University of Limerick to student engagement? Does it differ for access students to the mainstream cohort? How do you get that balance right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a balancing act here, because what we want to do is we want to mainstream as much as is possible, because universities are such big systems. So the more that you decouple people from the mainstream of the system, the more difficult it becomes to navigate it. So what we're trying to do is have individualized, scaffolded approaches to supporting learning, but that scaffold leads into the mainstream as much as possible, so that the experience for the student, whether they're coming from, or irrespective of the method that they've come into college, or what skills and capacities that they bring, the ultimate experience is as similar as possible. And so it's that tightrope between offering lots of individualized supports versus at the same time almost diluting those as the student progresses their way through the educational pathway that they've chosen.
Okay, thanks indeed for that, Patrick. Joanne, great to talk to you again. It's been a while since we chatted. You were something of a regular on News Talk. Tell us about, look, you've obviously been listening to what the guys have been saying. I'm kind of interested from your personal perspective. What for you were the biggest challenges in going to university?
Yeah, I suppose for me, I was incredibly lucky because I was under a scholarship program with UCC. So I was kind of fortunate that a good chunk of that financial burden that would have been on my parents, myself, and my family was kind of not eradicated immediately, but we had a lot of stuff off our minds, things that people would kind of take for granted. We're all wanting to live on campus, that's fine, tick. But unfortunately, I have to take 2 rooms because I have a PA who has to be with me, kind of not 24/7, but with me just in case I kind of need anything. It was basically my hands and legs. On top of it, we have kind of access issues, that I would kind of face, day to day, getting into college, at the right times. Like I remember we had a bus service, but the bus service would only operate from 9 to 12 and 4 to 6. And there was nothing wrong with that. But if you had a lecture finishing at 12, you wanted to go home, like you weren't going to linger around. I probably should say in front of all the college people, I was in the library like a good student. But no, you just kind of, you wanted to live your life like the rest of the college students, the ones that could go home and different things like that. And then on top of it, one thing that I did realize was that if you were in, I suppose, a department where necessarily the funding wasn't maybe going down, or else it just wasn't there in the first place, you found yourself at a kind of automatic disadvantage. I remember, days where we didn't have access to a scanner, to scan materials onto my laptop for online kind of coursework. And, things like that, I think a lot of people would take for granted. And I didn't kind of want to go back to the disability officer all the time, not in a snitches get stitches kind of way, but just because I didn't want to burden her with the really boring stuff, I don't have a scanner. Whereas I wanted to talk to her about important things. I wanted to talk to her about, access into employment, could I get an opportunity to go abroad, maybe like the rest of my peers, and different things like that. And, I didn't really want to bore her with the day-to-day practicality stuff of, oh, we didn't get access into this classroom today. We didn't get access to this kind of course material because it wasn't there on an online kind of platform. And it was only when I moved abroad to the University of York that I kind of realized that the importance of having access for people with disabilities is it has to be implemented across the board, not just from a disability officer level, but it has to be implemented at department level as well. And I was very fortunate that I had lecturers, professors, and various academics who were fighting my case all the time, and they did want to see kind of me benefit from various kind of new ways of teaching, and they wanted to learn. But I think like everyone else, they had a lot on their plate as well. I had a lot on my plate. I was learning how to live without my family, so yeah.
I'm curious, I think it was Siobhan was saying earlier on about the sort of the broad buy-in that was needed. Was that there when you were in college, do you think?
It definitely was there, like after a while. I was, as I said, very fortunate that I was under a scholarship program. So I had other access to things that maybe other students wouldn't necessarily have. I had a great support group developed through the scholarship. You know, I had other people who were vested in me from a university kind of point of view. So I was very fortunate that I had other people to bounce off of. But I did find that if you got to certain departments or you got to certain places, either because it was a case of they had too much on their plate, or it was just because, look, the funding wasn't there, or maybe the interest wasn't there. I'm not too sure. Some people just weren't really into it. And I think that was more of a case of people just weren't into it because, as I said, maybe they just weren't really, they were like, look, my way is the highway and that's it. And sure, I'd adapt, like, don't get me wrong. I loved being a part of the academic and loved being like another student. I didn't want to be Joanne without limbs in the classroom and them looking out for me. I wanted to be Joanne the student. So I liked kind of both approaches. I liked the cold way of kind of going, look, Joanne, your deadline is this, and if you don't make it, it's the end of the day. But also I think some flexibility is needed in that, you know, if people can't get access or people can't do different things, you have to be a bit more flexible as well. Now, I'm very competitive, so if someone gave me a deadline, I was making that damn deadline. So just
no
kind
doubt.
of different things like that, you know. I think definitely an opportunity, or maybe an opportunity to be flexible, is kind of something that I would kind of urge everyone. And I know it's hard, you know, given how everything is at the minute, but just be aware and be flexible.
And just briefly, Joanne, just before I go back to the rest of the panel, the biggest barriers to the full college experience, in your opinion, what are they? What were they when you were there? What are they now, do you think?
For me, I think it's still access, and I think it's physical and metaphorical access. And I suppose by metaphorical access, I mean having people on boards or committees or different places that can make an actual impact, either that have experienced it from their point of view, or they have an interest and a caring way of wanting to know what's kind of going on. I think that's what I mean by metaphorical access. And then physical access, I suppose what I mean by that is that I can wake up at 9 o'clock in the morning, go into my class, and I don't have it now, admittedly, but I could go into my class knowing that the day was going to be a seamless transition for me. I could be like the rest of my peers. I could go get my lunch like a normal person. I could hang out with my friends in the cafe, in the library, wherever it may be, and know that I don't have to sit there and go, oh, Jesus Christ, I hope the lift is working today, or, oh, Jesus, I hope this is functioning, you know, different things like that.
Not too much to ask for.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, as I think it was Caroline said earlier, you know, even online, like Zoom packages that don't have a captioning function, like I wouldn't know these things exist. So I think you have to either be the person or have experienced it in the first place to kind of understand. I think that's what's really important.
Okay, great answer, Joanne. Anna, could I bring you back in? I'm just wondering about practical changes that you've noticed since you began University for All.
Oh, yes. Well, we have been at this project now for 3 years, and real life examples of practical changes is the everyday conversations that happen around inclusion. So it's not just the Access and Lifelong Learning staff. Our president, our registrar, our senior academics thinking about inclusion. Our academics who are every day standing in front of the classroom. Yesterday I was part of a conversation about how to reduce the workload for mature students. And that's a real practical example. But one of the things we found when we started this work was there was so much good practice going on, but it was under the radar. And if you look at our publications, which we have many around curriculum design, around assessment design, they all illustrate examples of good practice where academics and professional staff were demonstrating inclusion, although they didn't know they were doing it and there wasn't a lot of visibility given to it. So that's it's the everyday conversations about inclusion being spread out across the university, and more examples of good practice across teaching and learning.
Okay. Word of mouth is as important as anything else.
Yeah. Everybody likes to jump on board when they see that it's possible to achieve success. And it's easy to achieve success. It's the small things. And Dara mentioned some of the small things around strategies around teaching and learning. And those small strategies can help your engagement with all students and make life that little bit easier if you're teaching or if you're designing a sports service.
Okay, thanks for that, Anna. Dara, can I bring you back in here? Head has been involved in a lot of the development work around universal design for learning. Can you tell us a little bit more about these and I suppose the kind of impact it can have on students?
Sure. I mean, I suppose I'll give you the elevator pitch because I could go on for a long time about these. But really, they're about designing in more flexibility, more accessibility, more student voice, in other words, bringing student voice into the work, and more choice for students at the point of delivery for all students, not just our kind of access or targeted cohorts. It's really about giving students more agency and choice right in the mainstream delivery, giving them more independence in their learning, reducing their reliance on the support services by reducing the need for these various accommodations in the first place. So it's actually quite transformative in the student experience because what it's really doing is it's kind of transferring the responsibility more from the student themselves back into the wider college community for inclusion. And yeah, I suppose in terms of what's happening, we're seeing that the whole sector is growing momentum in this. And Anna mentioned it there. I'll give you one example of it. Head and UCD Access and Lifelong Learning have a partnership on the UDL badge, which is a professional development program. Siobhan mentioned it earlier. That's a badge done in conjunction with the National Forum for the Enhancement of Teaching and Learning. Last year, 55 people went through our joint rollout of the badge, which runs every October to December. This year, that explosion in interest means we'll have more than 10 times that number doing it in 1 year. So that's the kind of huge growth and interest. And I think we are seeing this sectoral momentum. But for students on the ground every day, what it means is that it's actually a transformative learning experience. It's a totally different learning experience on the ground because they're actually being asked to take active partnership, I suppose, roles in their own learning experience and have a contribution to how their learning develops and how the programs develop as well.
Okay, all right. Thanks indeed for that, Dara. We're almost out of time, guys, but I do want to start, or I do want to finish rather, by asking you each a question. It's kind of similar, I suppose, to the question I put to the students earlier on. If you had an opportunity to do one change, or if you could urge the government to make one change in relation to improving opportunities for access to higher education, what would that change be? Patrick, I might go to you first on this one.
I think if we could, right from the macro level, right down to the most local of level, adopt a financial model that would that would allow us adaptability and flexibility to put into place teaching and learning structures that meet the needs of people who come through non-traditional routes or disadvantaged routes, and that would allow us to co-develop with students packages and pathways that would enhance their capacities and their learning. So there's something about taking the resources that already exist and just rethinking them and reframing them to allow decisions to be made at a very local level as to how they would be spent and operationalized using. We talk about data at local level, but at the individual level, so that educational packages of care and support are as meaningful to the individual student as possible.
Okay, all right. Dara, I know you're under time pressure, so I'll just come to you with your choice for that question.
Yeah, man, look, I'd echo what Patrick is saying there. I think the highlight of the importance of teaching and learning and putting that on a similar footing actually to the research initiatives that happen in universities is very important. But actually one big one is in terms of the funding system that we use. And Anna has done great work on this with the IUA, is recognising the importance of part-time learners, and both within SUSI and within the funding that goes into colleges, because I think it's a massive issue. I think Anna has that phrase, the student is a student is a student, and which proposes really funding part-time students proportionally as the same as full-time students. I think that would be massive, as well as maybe placing that priority around UD and UDL into the next national access plan as we look to redevelop it next year.
Okay, Joanne?
Yeah, I mean, I would kind of echo what the guys have said so far, especially probably from the funding department. And more importantly, I would say more encouragement for collaboration among all the universities and all the plans and all the schemes that exist kind of in the world. There's no point having, from my point of view, there's no point having an incredibly good scheme in the Dublin, Kildare, kind of Louth, Meath area, but yet you go to kind of Galway, Sligo, maybe Letterkenny IT, wherever, and the same implementation isn't there, because of distance, and also are people kind of wanting to go out. So they'd be kind of the bunch of stuff that I would say. And also, again, just the importance of having people on these kind of decision makers who have literally walked the walk, no matter what it is that they've done. I think that is super important as well, because I think for far too long anyways, some people just kind of like to make kind of enforce policies that necessarily are going to hinder people rather than actually make a big difference. And I think that's the most important thing.
Okay, well said, Joanne. And Anna, the last word to you on this. You're muted, Anna. Anna, yeah, perfect. Thank you. Easily done. Easily done.
Indeed. I think if I had just one shot at this, what I would ask the Minister to do is to apply the principle of parity of treatment when it comes to financial aid, and parity of treatment would be offered to all students regardless of their mode of study. So part-time students and full-time students, they would be financially supported to the level that they need, including accommodation. And accommodation is so expensive, and particularly for mature students and students that are older, it is a real barrier. And students with disabilities, like Joanne mentioned, that she needs 2 rooms. So parity of treatment where financial aid takes place. And I recognise that there has been progress, but we need some more.
Okay, super. Anna, thank you indeed for that. Thanks to Anna, Joanne, Dara, and to Patrick. Siobhan, we're almost out of time, but I know you just want to come in and make a very quick point in relation to our discussion. Siobhan,
yes, and I absolutely agree and support everything that has been said by every other speaker about how to make this sustainable. I think particularly Anna mentioned it when she said inclusion is an ongoing and never-ending job. One of the things I think that would make a change is to actually make it part of the funding system for all the higher education systems. They are centrally funded through the HEA and other bodies. That's one of the ways to do it, is actually make them report, make all higher education institutes report on what they're doing to support the inclusion, and make that part and parcel of the funding system. And that will incentivize it continually and on an ongoing basis.
Okay, Siobhan, thanks so much for that. If I could borrow a phrase, just listening to what you're saying, if I could borrow a phrase from I think it was the 2002 general election, it's kind of a lot done, a lot more to do. I think that's the message. But let's focus on the positive. We have done a lot. I've learned so much from listening to you guys today. I found that really enlightening and really encouraging. I want to thank everybody for joining us. And sorry, we didn't get to all the messages, but I know the speakers have been looking at them as well. So thanks to everybody who participated. Really fascinating discussion. Thanks to all the panelists for their time today. I suppose this is one of the many debates we need to move access, inclusion, and diversity from the margins, as you were talking about in higher education, to become, I suppose, everybody's business, because it is everybody's business. I hope we made a bit of a start on that today. Thanks to all of you at home and in the office for attending today, and we hope to see you at one of the IUA Future of Ireland events planned for 2021. More details on IUA's access work and on My Uni Life, which is just the most brilliant documentary. I just found it so inspirational, but that can be found on iua.ie. Guys, have a great afternoon. Thanks so much for your presence today. I really enjoyed it, and great to have your company. Take care.